You probably know what this is, and you know what it's supposed to do, but have you tried it yet? Not to worry, I am going to show you everything that you need to use your walking foot on your domestic sewing machine to get the best quilting ever. I'm Leah Louise from Inspired Quilting by Leah Louise, and I am going to show you my tips and tricks, what works for me to get all my quilting done on my domestic machine with a walking foot. There are some basic steps that you can use that will get you started, and I'm going to show you some designs that you can start right now. It's not that difficult once you know the tricks. So I want to share this with you. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm anxious for you to see how to do this. Your even feed walking foot is a wonderful tool for sewing multiple layers, for quilting. There's a lot that you can do with this, and I'm going to show you how to get started with your walking foot. The first thing we need to do is understand what it does and then mount it to our machine. We want to attach it and use it as the presser foot for our machine as we quilt. Now, we have generally a fork or some sort of mechanism that will hold your walking foot against the needle thumb screw up here. This is the thumb screw that you use to tighten in your needle. And as your needle moves up and down, that's going to move your little fork up and down, and you'll notice, see how those feed dogs are working? Those are the feed dogs on the top of your fabric that will work in conjunction with the feed dogs on the bottom. So the first thing is to turn off our light, off our power, because we don't want that needle to be moving while we have our fingers in here. And remove your current presser foot, and we want to make sure that we take everything off, including the shank portion. The even feed walking foot will mount directly to the shank on your machine. Now, if your machine didn't come with a walking foot, you can buy a universal piece that is interchangeable between a number of different machines. The biggest determining factor is whether you have a long or a short shank, and your machine manual can tell you that. And sometimes the universal walking feet will tell you what machines they fit best. Now, the fork here that moves needs to be fitted onto that thumb screw that holds the needle. And as I'm doing that, I'm bringing this piece around the shank because I'm going to screw that in to hold it in place. And while we're doing this, we want to keep an eye on our needle that it's not too low, because you see as I'm moving this, I could snap off the tip of that needle, and I don't want that to happen. With my foot in place, I'm going to pick up my thumb screw right here, and I'm going to fit this right up to the shank, nice and snug, put my thumb screw in so I can turn it and attach it. And the screw may be different depending on your machine. Sometimes it's a scratch, what do we call a cap screw that has a large round head, but generally they can all be turned with your thumb and finger and then just tighten it with a screwdriver. Now, another item that probably didn't come with but you'll find useful are these cleaning brushes, and I'll show you how that works too. So we're going to turn our machine on, let everything settle. Now notice as I move my needle up and down, you see how these feed dogs are moving up and down? And that's what's going to keep our fabric moving nice and smooth. So I'm going to put my fabric here, and I always hold my thread back. Remember, if you hold those threads back, especially this top thread, you're not going to get all that knotting on the back side of your fabric. So we're going to go ahead and we'll just start sewing. And you'll see I can let go and it sews. Now obviously I need to keep my hands steady and close so that I can make sure we go straight. It's not completely autopilot, but it moves the fabric. And the secret is let the walking foot do the movement. Let it walk the fabric through at the rate that it's sewing. You can speed it up, but you don't want to go full speed because then you're going to have too much going on and the walking feet may not keep up with the rate of the feed dogs underneath your machine. When you're finished with your walking foot and you want to switch back to your regular presser foot, you just reverse the step. So we're going to loosen the thumb screw and we'll take this off. Actually, I want to turn this off. And I always do that because I get concerned about this thread. If my foot happens to hit the foot pedal, I don't want it to start sewing and go through my finger. So here we are. That was it. You saw how easy that was, right? We slide it on just like that, screw it in, and then take it off. So this is how you can mount your walking foot to your machine and start your walking foot quilting right away. You are going to love the ease that this walking foot will make your quilting, to make your all your sewing of any kind of thick fabrics or multiple layers of fabric. Everything is going to go at the same rate, and you'll get fantastic results with even stitches, smooth stitches, no skip stitches. And then when you're finished, you just grab your little wire brushes, and they come in an assortment of sizes, but you want to clean your foot out because it will collect dust and bits of string and fabric, and by getting in there you can keep it clean. And there we go. We can get the small ones that'll work on the top sections where the openings are a little smaller, but just to keep all that dust and lint out of there, it's going to keep your walking foot lasting longer. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you're ready to use your walking foot. Now that you know the basics of how to attach your walking foot and get everything threaded and ready to go, I want to show you 3 of the easiest methods that you can quilt. And this is a great place to start. You'll notice that I'm just using a small piece of fabric. This is a wonderful way for you to do your first trial runs. And before you start quilting, especially in the beginning, always practice on a piece like this. Now, I will take a piece like this and use it over and over and over. Actually, let me show you. I have this little guy right here that I keep next to my machine, and you can see I use the ends in order to set the tension and just make sure everything looks good and that I like the way the thread is, all those kinds of things. So don't feel you have to start on your quilt immediately. Now, it doesn't mean you need, more than 5 or 10 minutes just to practice, but it is going to help the final look of what you're doing because you get your hands and eyes coordinated, and the muscle memory will start kicking in after you've done this a while. You notice my hands just go right like this. This is how I quilt. Now, this is a position that you're going to find for yourself what works best. I keep my hands in front of the presser foot, and this way I can steer where I'm going. And we don't want to pull or push our fabric. We just want it to move along. There we go. Get that thread out of the way. Just move along as the foot pulls it forward. We don't want to try and push or pull from the back. And I've tried that before. Oh, I'd be in a hurry. Oh, I'm going to pull it. And this was, years ago when I was first learning how to use a walking foot. And your stitches don't look very pretty and you get some sort of jagged lines. So if you're finding that your stitching line isn't as smooth and even as you'd like, then take a look at how you're handling your fabric. If you're holding it in place as you sew and just let it go, then you should get some really good looking stitches. So let me go ahead and get my glove on. Now I'm going to set this stitch to just a little bit longer. Generally when I quilt, when I do my piecework, I will sew with a 2.5 stitch. But when I do my quilting, I'll use a 3.0. And this is just 2 pieces of cotton with a piece of batting in the middle. It's spray basted, so it sticks, but yet I can also manipulate it and move it as I need to. So what I'm going to do is start first in the center. You see I have 2 lines, so I'm going to show you 3 different methods that I think will be beneficial. And I'm going to begin with the wavy line because it is the easiest. It is the most forgiving, and you can get away with so much because there's no right or wrong. And, everybody draws their own wavy line. And if you have a little difficulty, get a pencil, write on some paper, get some scratch paper, write on the back of your fabric and just draw some lines and just sort of get a feel for that movement that works well for you. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything in place here. And we're just going to start. When I'm doing a quilt, machine quilting, I start in the middle of the fabric, not the center. I'll start on the edge and sew from side to side. When you begin in the center, that's generally a common rule for free motion quilting. If you're using your feed dogs, you don't have as much of an issue of the fabric crimping up underneath and tucking and folding, which is why we start in the center, because as you're using your free motion foot and working outward, it sort of moves the fabric as you go because there's no feed dogs on the top or the bottom. This way we have feed dogs in both top and bottom, so our fabric is moving equally in both the top and the bottom side of the quilt sandwich. All right, so let's go ahead and get moving along here. I hold my thread to the back so it doesn't knot up underneath, and I'm just going to put my needle down here and run those first couple stitches, and you can choose how you want to start. Oftentimes, instead of back stitching, I'll start about an inch off the edge because I'll have extra batting and backing with my quilt top, in from that outer edge. And then I'll just sew from there. That'll sort of lock my stitching in place and begin sewing. And then when I come back and trim everything and get the binding on, all these edge stitches are locked in place, so we don't have to worry about that. Now, if you saw that previous video that I just did using waves, we just go from one end to the other. This is going to be a little different in that I'm going to make them narrower and I'm going to make large and small. So there's going to be a lot more distinction between the waves. So they're not going to be as repeating as the other version was. So I'm going to turn my fabric a little this way because that's where I want to go. And then with my hands, I'm just guiding. I'm lifting this up because I'm turning that way. And now this hand over here is the one that's directing. And I'm going to take shallow curves, then I'll go ahead and take some wider, longer curves, and I'm just going to work from one end to the other. Now, because this is a small piece, I can just flip this around. On a larger quilt, it's going to be more practical to just pull back and start at the top and work your way forward. So what I'm going to do is move over roughly an inch, and I'm just going to start doing the same thing again, but I don't want my curves to fall in the same pattern or the same motion the way they move through, and I'm making some smaller ones here. And then I'm going to turn around, and because this is coming in, I'm going to make this one go out just to keep things moving along. I'm going to make a longer curve here, bring it in, and then bring it out. All right, we'll turn it around one more time. I've got room for another row. Now this is a great way to do an overall quilting pattern. And sometimes you just want to quilt from one side to the other and not pay particular attention to specific spots. Other times you may want to actually quilt within blocks in various ways. And when I was making a lot of kids' quilts, I did sort of a modified log cabin with a large block in the middle. And then I would just free motion. They were tropical quilts, so I'd free motion a starfish or a seashell in the middle. So each of those were sewn independently. But I did the overall block work on, like I said, it was a log cabin, so it looked like it had sashing along or lattice on the inside. And that works out really well. So there's a lot you can do with it. There's, like I said, there's just no right or wrong. It's whatever works for you. Now, another fun thing to do when you have a pattern like this is, whoops, I'm kind of moving things here, is sort of move along and maybe bring in another piece or another line that sort of overlays a little bit. And it just kind of meanders like this. And then you've got some crossing curves, which is a lot of fun. And so here I'll start wide. And when I do a crossing curve, I tend to keep it on the narrow side. That's a hard one to do. There we go. When you have that big long wave. There we are. That looks better. So see, this got a little wonky because I wasn't following it. But that's okay, because you know what, actually, because if I wanted to, I can come back and do another and just sort of work through here and then maybe come over and back and just sort of work like this. So feel free to make it work. So see, that's kind of fun. And especially if you're using variegated fabrics, threads. I love doing this kind of quilting with a variegated thread where that thread changes color as you move along. I just think that looks really pretty. But you see how there's just, the slight motion of turning the fabric in either direction, so you can get some fun patterns going through and some overlaps, and it just creates some interest as you move along. So let me go ahead, and you can tell I'm picking up a bit of speed. And I'm going to take some wider turns. See how I turn it? Now, you don't want to pull your fabric. It's okay if you hit your speed and increase your speed, but you also have to increase your hand movement. Let's kind of swing down here so that you're keeping up with that speed. So start slow and see what works for you. All right, so there we are. So there's some different ideas for you to think about when you want to just do some wavy lines. You can run a couple semi-parallel and then come in with something that crosses over them, sort of do like this where you create loops along the way. There's just some fun things you can do. Now, another very common method is channel quilting, and that's rows of straight lines. So I'm going to follow my line right here. Actually, you know what? Let me put my guide in, because I was quite surprised in the last video that not everybody understood what this was. It's simply a guide. It plugs into the back side, and actually it depends on your machine, but mine has two, so I can have a guide on the left or the right. Like I said, this machine's over 20 years old, so not all the new and improved methods have been included. So I want to start in the middle, and you can choose to work from the center or from, in a narrow place like this. Like, let's say you're going through a border or there's a lattice strip and you want to do that by itself and not do the whole quilt at the same time, then you're going to kind of want to work within that smaller space. And using a guide like this is helpful. Now, I'm giving myself, I think it's about 3.5 inches, almost 4. Yeah, so we'll go 3.5. So we'll go right about here's our center. So that means my guide will be right on that line, and I'm just going to sew a straight stitch from one end to the other. And my guide is going to keep me in place so that I know it'll be straight. All right. Now I'm going to use that same line to take me in the opposite direction. Whoops, I better cut that before we get tangled up. This way I will kind of set my margins, my boundaries. And when you're doing this, when you're using a guide, watch your guide, not your needle. Because if you take your eye off this, you're going to be going every which way. Don't worry about the needle. The needle will go wherever the guide is directed. All right. Now we'll come back here. We'll go to the other side. And just to make things easy, I'm not worried about cutting my threads. We'll take care of that after. This is, like I said, just a simple practice piece. Now we'll get this last line in on this side. And you can see when you use your foot pedal, it'll go pretty quickly. Now, this is where you can decide. Now, this is about 1 3/4-ish, I think, right? Yeah, between 1 5/8 to 1 3/4. And you can just use large channels like this across your quilt, and that's going to be absolutely fine. Sometimes, though, you may want to do narrow channels. So let's see, if I go here, so I'm going to split the difference and go down the middle. Now, I'm not going to worry about my guide, because what I'm going to do is keep my presser feet kind of centered between these two lines, more or less. So this gives us narrower channel quilting. And then let's take it one more. And again, I'm just going to put my presser feet between the two lines. And there's a lot of leeway that you can take in how you do this, whether you have them close together, far apart. I like to do like small wall hangings to have the quilting done tightly, more close together, because as it's hanging, that fabric will get heavy, and I don't want it to buckle and bow when it's hung up for a long time. So we do that. Now we can also come in and do a narrow right here. And then what I'm doing is I am taking this stitch line and I'm putting it right to the inside edge of my presser foot. So that's going to keep me sort of straight, but this is not something that we measure with a ruler and go in and say, oh my gosh, is that exactly 1/8 of an inch? And you can tell no, because it wavers, but that's okay. And then let's kind of put one in the middle here. I'll just get that out of the way. Make sure all my threads are under. And so that's the extent of channel quilting. And it's quite easy to do. Now this is also a good idea if you want to use a decorative stitch. Now, I do not have many decorative stitches on this machine that really works for this, but let me go ahead. Here's one. This is what I use on my binding. This is what I call a buttonhole foot, and I love using this on the binding because it does a straight stitch, but then it stitches into the binding and holds it in place. And for me, I really appreciate that extra, that extra hold that it gives. By stitching into the binding itself, then everything is held together really well. Now you have to be careful with decorative stitches. You can't go too fast. There we go. And so you've got a nice, I got a little bump there. I've got a nice, it's not very straight, but it looks nice. And if you want to use that on an edge, I think that would look really pretty. So these are some ideas. And what I want to show you now is another fun one. And it's something that you see a lot. It's called a crosshatch. So what I want to do is basically we'll start like we did here. I'm going to stitch down this line. Whoops, let's get a straight stitch going. And bump the size up. There we are. And so I have a line drawn. You may not be able to see it because it's starting to fade. I use the disappearing ink. And I want this to be, let's say, 1.5 inches. So I'm going to put my ruler right here. I'm going to line my needle up right there, and I'll put my guide right on the stitching. So I know when I sew right here, I'm at 1.5 inches. So let's go ahead and do a couple rows of this. And I'm going to do it again. Now I don't have my other guide handy. So what did I say? That's 1.5 inches? Yes. So if this is 1.5 inches, it's going to go about right there. Whoops, that's right. I have to go this way. Okay, I got to turn it around. I can't go the other way doing that. All right, let's do it this way. That just makes it easier for me. And you can see, while I was talking, I moved. There's sort of a big bend here. But those are minor issues that are not really going to be very visible when you figure you've got this entire quilt. Now, you would probably not use as small a line as this. On a full quilt, you would probably go maybe 2 inches. But that's okay. We're just going to get started. And so when you do a crosshatch, basically what we're doing is like tic-tac-toe. We're going to go in one direction and then the other. So I would do everything in one direction of the quilt from one side to the other, then turn it around and do the opposite. And then when I get to the end, I will sew along the outer margin until I get right where I need to be, and then I'll lift my foot so I can make sure my dimension is where it needs to be. Now I think something like this would really be fun in like scrappy quilts or crumb quilting, because for those, you have lots of little pieces, just move this out a little bit, that are sort of tucked in together. And this would pick up a lot of, because I think of quilting as supporting the fabric, supporting the pieces that have already been sewn together. And I think something like this, because you've got lots of coverage with your quilting, would work great for that. All right, we'll just keep going around, but you see how we're getting that cross-hatch look? And I just guesstimate about how far 1.5 inches is. Oh, look at that. Oh my gosh, I got lucky on that one. And if you want to do diamonds, you can absolutely do that. And what you do is you sew corner to corner. And actually, that's a bit wider here. I have a tutorial on that I did. Actually, it was a hot pad that I did this spring. And I will link that above so you can see how that looks. I love the diamond effect. I just think it looks so pretty. And there we are. So you see how simply this works. But what I want you to see is how easy it is to use this foot. It does so much for you. All you're doing is guiding the fabric. Here we are. In that short amount of time, we've got a lot of quilting done with a variety of different ideas. So for your basic intro quilting with your machine and your walking foot, just practice with a piece like this. Oh yeah, and let's look on the back. See how beautiful that looks? Everything is nice and neat, except where I left my threads hanging. But it looks terrific. So this is a fantastic way to do your quilts, and I use it all the time. I use my walking foot, as I said before, it's fantastic in rag quilts as well, because you have those thick layers that you need to keep together. But you know what else? If you have really long strips, like when you're doing your borders or your sashing, this is great for long pieces because this keeps that fabric on top moving. You know how sometimes you'll get to the end, and if you haven't pinned it, you'll have one piece that'll hang over the other because it didn't feed in at the same rate, and one piece either slipped through or stretched or whatever the case may be. So this is something you need to practice, and it won't take long. You just spend an hour, even a half hour one afternoon, and just get some fabric under there. Get the foot on, understand how it's attached, and just sew. That's all there is to it. Simply sew. So with that, I'm going to leave you today, and we will pick up on this later with doing some other different stitches. I have some other quilts I want to do with you, and we'll do an entire quilt with a pattern. I haven't decided exactly what that'll be, but it's going to be terrific, and I can't wait to share it with you. But thank you for being here. Thank you for hanging in this long and watching all this, and I hope you learned a lot, and I can't wait to hear about your even feed walking foot quilting. Be sure to add your questions in the comments, and I'll make sure to answer them, but I'll also include them in the future videos, because I want to do some machine quilting videos. I think we've done so many quilts now, we need to get them all quilted, and this will be a perfect way to do that. All right, well, remember, I'd love it if you could like and comment and subscribe to my channel, but I would really appreciate if you could share this video with others. I'd love for other quilters to be able to pick up on this and work forward in their quilting progress as well. Well, thank you again. It's always a pleasure. Have a fantastic rest of your day.